Welcome to the Outsmart Burnout podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Zarya Rubin, a functional medicine doctor, an international speaker, and a burnout badass because I've been there myself. After walking away from my own high-stress medical career, I discovered how to break free from burnout to reclaim my passion, purpose, and joy. And now I'm here to help you do the same. From science-backed tips to time-saving hacks, and hopefully some aha moments that just might change your life. So sit back, relax, and let's do this. Laurie Maddalena is a leadership provocateur, speaker, and author dedicated to redefining leadership beyond burnout and busyness. As the founder of Envision Excellence, she's spent 17 years helping high-achieving professionals make what she calls the most important shift in leadership. From being the fixer, the overwhelmed manager who carries the entire team's weight on her back, to the facilitator, the intentional leader who builds teams that take real ownership. She was VP of HR by age 30, has been trained by Brené Brown, mentored by Jack Canfield, and her clients include some seriously impressive brands. But here's the thing that I love most about Laurie. She doesn't just teach sustainable leadership, she actually lives it. She caps her work week at 40 hours while running a firm and raising 3 kids. She believes that leadership excellence should not require personal depletion, and I could not agree more. So happy to welcome Laurie to the Outsmart Burnout podcast.
Thank you, Dr. Zarya. I'm so excited to have our conversation.
Yeah, me too. So there's so much we could talk about here, but let's dive in. And I really want to dig into your sort of archetypes and how you came up with these concepts. And obviously, it's probably because you lived a great deal of this either personally or in the workplace environment. And so just maybe take us back to some of your earlier days or when you realized that as a leader and as a manager, you were really the fixer in
Yeah.
disguise.
Yeah, I think there were two pivotal moments for me in my own leadership career. And one was my first promotion to a supervisor role. So this was very early in my career when I was working in an IT department. My manager came one day and said, "We're going to hire someone to, get more support in the department, and that person will report to you." And about 3 weeks later, we hired a woman named Pat. I had zero training. I didn't know what it meant to be a supervisor at all. No one sat down with me and talked with me about what their expectations were. So I did what I thought I was supposed to do, which was answer her questions and give direction. And then, that worked okay. I mean, I wasn't the best leader, but in that environment, it worked okay. And then fast forward to several years later, I was in human resources and I was an HR generalist. And this is the second part that really was pivotal for me because my VP decided to promote me from an HR generalist, which is an independent role. I was focused on payroll, benefits, compensation analysis, to director of HR. And 3 months into that role, in one of our one-on-ones, she gave me some feedback that was tough to hear, but it was really important. And she said, "Laurie, I didn't promote you to keep doing the things you were doing before. You should not be fixing payroll issues. You should not be answering benefit questions. You have 2 people on your team. You need to delegate." And I still hadn't had any leadership training. So I promptly enrolled in some and I started to seek that out for myself. But that was a really important time because I thought that the value I brought in the organization was my technical expertise. And in an independent role, that was important. But I think what happens for many of us when we move into leadership roles, particularly if we haven't received training, which is a lot of people, is that we don't realize there's a fundamental shift in what our value is now. The value we bring to the organization is our leadership skills, not our technical abilities. And in my work, I find that many times it's the technical background that is the very thing holding us back from success in leadership because our identity is tied to it. And it's easy to get back into the trenches and be the fixer and do the things rather than elevate ourselves to that leadership level. And so we spend our days spinning our wheels and overwhelmed and being that fixer for our teams when there is a better way. It's just that for a lot of us, we haven't been given those tools and resources.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you raised a really important, valid point. It's that when you are really good at your job, and that generally includes or predominantly includes the technical aspects, then you get promoted for that, for your skills at doing that job, not necessarily for your leadership skills. Although the more you climb up the ladder, the more leadership responsibilities you take on, oftentimes without training. And some people, they are just really good at what they do and they're not great leaders.
Yeah.
But because they get promoted and that's kind of assumed to be part of the job, I think there should almost be like two promotional tracks. And one is you get promoted in your subject matter area or your niche of expertise. And the other is that you get promoted because of your leadership skills. And they're not necessarily the same, right?
They're not. And I think, what you just articulated is a fundamental issue in so many of our companies is that traditionally we've promoted people based on technical skills, that they're the technical superstar, the go to person on the team. And that has gotten us to a place now where we have many people in management roles who either shouldn't be a leader, don't desire to be a leader, or haven't been given the skills to be a leader. And when I worked for a credit union, I had someone on my team, best employee I've worked with. Her name is Eve. And I remember my CEO coming to me and saying, Eve is fantastic. You should promote her to HR manager. And when I talked with Eve, she said to me, I never want your job. I don't want to manage people. I don't want to have tough conversations or give feedback or any of that. And she was so self aware. And I think that's such a great quality of knowing what it takes to be in that role. I think we need to do a better job in organizations of giving people a peek behind the curtain before they get there and help them understand what it is because leadership has shifted a lot in the past 2 decades. We've moved from a more traditional transactional type of leadership and management where we were conditioned, many of us, myself included, to be the fixer, to get in the trenches, to solve problems, to know the answers, to move things along and make sure projects moved along. And that was in a time a few decades ago when what was valued at work was tenure, loyalty, sacrifice. And we've shifted now to having 5 generations in the workplace that have different values. Things have evolved over the years, more women in the workplace, more households where both partners are working full time. And so there's no longer this approach of sacrifice. People want quality of life, they want meaning, fulfillment. They want a job that contributes to their life in a positive way, not take away from it. And so leading today requires a much higher level of skill than it did a few decades ago. Now we need to coach our team and create development plans and build ownership and alignment and give real time feedback. We're not waiting to the annual evaluation. And so it's a lot more time, it's a different focus, and that's what that fixing to facilitating is really about. It's how do we move from that more transactional management style, like how I was when I became a supervisor, tell the person what to do, answer their questions, to more of a facilitator where we're now building ownership on our team, we're coaching our team, we're delegating, we're building our bench strength so that we don't have to carry everything. I mean, management is, I call it the messy middle because there's a lot to it. I mean, we have people above us, our executives who are trying to get the strategic goals done. We have employees. It's it's a lot. It's a job that requires a lot, but I do think that sometimes our organizational practices, how we're approaching things in our workday contribute to that burnout, and it doesn't have to be that way.
Mm, yeah. Well, listen, I love that we're talking about this because I think it is really important to shed light on this and that people perhaps are not aware of what is going on in their workplace or aware of some of their own tendencies and habits. So we've talked a lot about the fixer. We've sort of skirted around it. I would love to dig in a bit more and just for people who are wondering, oh, am I a fixer? I might be. I think so. I mean, when I read some of the descriptions and some of the ways you talk about it, I was like, oh God, yeah, I'm totally a fixer. But so give us some background of like, who is the fixer? What does that look like? What do they do at work? And maybe what do they do at home? Because I'm going to guess that it probably carries over.
It does, and I'll just be upfront that for me as a parent, I'm really still working on not being a fixer because being that facilitator is much harder. But the fixer is someone, and by the way, I think this is really common. It's more common than not. I think a lot of us can relate to feeling like we're a fixer, and as I said, many of us were conditioned that that was how you lead. That you have to know the answers, get in and, fix the issues. So an example might be, let's say an employee comes to me and I'm the manager and they say, I have this issue, how do I handle it? A fixer would do one of two things. They would either say, give it to me, I'll take it on, I'll do it, I'll deal with it. Or they might just tell that person how to do it, do ABC, and send them off on their way. A facilitator will view this as an opportunity. This is an opportunity to build the critical thinking skills, the capacity of your team, develop your team member. It might take a little bit extra time, but move into more curiosity. And so they might say, well, what options have you thought of? Or what do you suggest? Or what's your next step? And they will take the time to help coach that person instead of just taking it on themselves. And it may sound like a small thing, but I think what happens is over time, we take on these small things and they build up. And then we're not using our team in a way so that we can be at that higher leadership level where we have time for coaching and development. Many leaders tell me, I don't have time to coach. I don't have time to develop my people. I barely have time to plan. I'm in meetings all day and, I'm having to be I'm that bottleneck really. We become the bottleneck by being the fixer. And so part of this is understanding what's getting in our way. How are we limiting that? How can we start to teach our staff to tap into their talents, to delegate to them because that's how they're going to learn and they're going to be the next leaders or whatever they move into. So facilitating is a daily practice. It's something that we can do with our teams in real time in a one-on-one moment, or it's something we can do in our meetings with people. Are we spending our meetings just going through a task list about what they did and where we are on things, or are we spending it, okay, what are your challenges? What's the most important thing we should be talking about? What's impeding your progress? Taking time to coach them through that so that they can feel like they have more agency and can get those results.
Mm, yeah. So it's kind of easier said than done to make that shift from fixer to facilitator, especially since, like we talked about, like being a fixer has probably served you.
Yes.
It's probably gotten you promoted. It's gotten you noticed and recognized and rewarded. And probably a lot of us are a little bit, I'm not going to say dependent on that role, but that positive feedback and, oh, you're so reliable. You're the go to person. You do this so well. And you're the one that we can trust and etc. And so then you become used to that. And it
Yes.
can be difficult to make that shift. So, how do folks, first of all, I guess, recognize when that fixer tendency has gone from being an asset to a liability?
Hmm.
And then how do we move beyond it and really undergo that transformation
Yeah.
from fixer to facilitator? Because,
Well,
yeah.
yeah, I think you're right that in most cases, we have felt this tie to that because that's how we have been rewarded, that it's those very skills that got us to where we are. And so I think the first piece is stepping back and understanding what our role is as a leader and defining what our key result areas are. And so when we move from a technical role where our key results were probably more technical based to a leadership role, I think not taking time to define that is why we tend to get back into the weeds because it feels good to check things off our list. I don't know about you, but I love checking things off every day. And
Yes.
I think in leadership, we lose some of that because we're not so task oriented. And so we have this propensity to, well, I'll come and help my team and I'll get back in there and it feels good. I feel I'm getting this dopamine hit and I feel
Mhm.
being helpful. and really we're not being helpful. So I think the first practice is one to understand fundamentally that when we move into leadership, our job changes. We're no longer the go to person. Our technical expertise is not the value. It's now the leadership qualities of being able to facilitate, coach other people, bring out their best performance, and build a team. The other is those key result areas, defining what are the top 3 to 5 most important results in this role as a leader. And this can help create clarity for us on where we'll spend more of our time rather than getting back in those weeds. And so for me in HR, part of my key result areas was to understand the best practices of creating a best place to work and my own expertise and background and research. I might have some people who supported me in that on my team, but fundamentally, I was responsible for that piece. So it's something that can't be completely delegated. And that's so creating that clarity around those key result areas and then instilling practices for ourselves that help us to stay at that leadership level and not get in the weeds. So I think there are a few practices in our companies that are absolutely counter to what we need to do as leaders. And I'd like to banish them from our organizations. And one of them is the open door policy. This is such a terrible practice and yet we perpetuate it. I think someone came up with this idea. And I think what they meant was that we want people to feel comfortable speaking up, sharing their ideas. We want approachable and supportive leaders. But what I found is that we've taken that to the extreme. And quite literally, managers will tell me, well, I can't close my door. I can't go to a different location. I have to be available for my team. And I think this is, if you are being interrupted all day, if your door is open all day, it's probably a good sign you're a fixer. Now, I'm not saying that this isn't easy. And I'm not suggesting, by the way, I think sometimes we get very black and white in our world of like, well, you're telling me to close my door all day. That's not what I'm saying. And I'm not saying do that without talking to your team either. But as leaders, we need to have some protected time to think strategically, to plan, to help develop our team. And so blocking some time on your calendar, I know for me, I have to go to a different location. I can't work in my office. It's sometimes the worst place for us to work because everyone knows that's where we are. They
Yep.
come in with us. And so if you are going to work in your office, it could be going to your team and saying, I'm going to work on a project for an hour. I need focus time. So I'm going to close my door and I'll be available at 1 o'clock. 95% of the time, you might have to train some of your team members. It might take a little time, but most times I find people really respect that. Now, we're not being unavailable, but we're protecting our time in a way that helps us to focus on the things that we're being measured on. And so that's one of the practices that I think is terrible that we just have to get rid of. Multitasking is another. And I know as moms, we feel like we're multitasking all the time. And I think there's a difference between being able to juggle a lot and doing more than one thing at a time. And so every single research study has shown that multitasking does not work.
I know. I keep trying to make it come out differently, but yeah.
Sometimes me too. And I have a focusing question that I ask myself because just like every leader, every human, I become overwhelmed sometimes. I try to not get into burnout as much as maybe I used to. But I ask myself, what is the most important thing I should be working on right now? Instead of having my email open and this project out in my tabs and all this, where I'm spinning my wheels and I'm going from thing to thing. By the way, I read a statistic once that said starting and stopping a project or a task, coming back to it, going back to it, that switching causes an increase to complete that by over 500%. So it takes 500% more time to complete a task because we're switching back and forth and we're not in the zone. And so it's not realistic for us as leaders to sit in our office all day with no distractions. Absolutely not. But there are practices that we can implement to help that focus and be much more intentional with that time so that we can get more out of that, feel a better quality of life, have more time for our team. There will be hard days, but asking yourself that focusing question, what is the most important thing I should be working on right now, can be really helpful.
I love that. I think that is really critical because we do get distracted. We end up responding to things, especially stimulation, notification, like, you know, emails are popping up and then you don't ignore that and you think like, okay, well, I have to respond to it because it's asking me to. But in reality, presumably most things can wait, but we get so distracted and prioritize the immediacy of
Yes.
something rather than the importance of something.
And I think we could go all day working 8, 10 hours, leave the office, and we were busy all day, but
And
we
be like,
think,
what did I get done?
"What did I even get done today?"
Nothing. Yeah.
And I know I've had days like that, and it's frustrating because you know that you're doing things, but are you working on the more intentional things? And so a lot of my work with managers and leaders is understanding no one is gonna come to our office, take some things away from us, and create that time and capacity for us. It's really a focus management and energy management, less about time. So it's making sure that we're focusing on the right things, that we're blocking some of that time, and simple practices. I find fundamental things that most people don't do can be extremely powerful. So, another example is before you leave the office or where you're working, before you leave for the day, take 5 minutes and think about what are my two most important areas to focus on tomorrow. This is a recalibration. I find it's also a stress relief. Most people leave the end of their day with their minds in chaos. Like it's late. I've already worked too late. I've got to leave. I've got to get home. And so we just kind of leave and we have a lot of loose ends in our mind. So then
It's like leaving the kitchen with, like, everything out, like, you've tried to make a meal and maybe you
yeah,
succeeded, maybe you burned it, but, like, the dishes are out, the pots, the pans, the ingredients, the everything. You're like, "Oh, I'll deal with this later."
yeah, that's a great analogy. It's like there's so many things, and then we're like overwhelmed, like, oh my gosh, just let me just leave. And those loose ends in our mind take up mental space and capacity. And so then we come home and we're with our kids and we're not present because we're thinking about that email we forgot to send or that report we forgot to do. And so that simple practice of taking a few minutes, what did I get done today? What did I not get done that I intended? Just making sure we're documenting, but then creating the clarity for the next day. What are my top two most important things? For me personally, this has been so impactful because then, and I also have a pad next to my bed because inevitably I think of the 50 things to do just before bed. But before I wouldn't write them down and then it would just be me trying to remember. And we can only remember a certain amount of things in our brain at one time, right? And so at least getting it out and it's a stress relief, it's a way to recalibrate and to set ourselves up for the next day.
I love that. Just that 5-minute practice of prioritization, because I think that that is something that, yeah, we tend to not be great at. And then it does create that overwhelm and that burnout,
Yes.
really, that constant stress. And, you talk about how burnout is not necessarily a personal problem,
Yeah.
but it's a leadership.
Yes.
And tell us a
Yes.
little bit more about that and
Yeah.
how all of this leads to burnout.
Yeah, I'm not diminishing the fact that there are personal practices, some of which we just talked about. I think there absolutely are personal practices, things that we can do as individuals to help us navigate not getting to burnout or recovering from burnout. But I think we're missing some fundamental pieces of it that contribute to it. And sometimes organizations will approach this in, well, let's have a stress management class or a meditation class or, do all these things. And by the way, then it's something else for people to do. I
Yeah.
like this class to learn about how I'm the problem and I need to fix myself.
Uh-huh.
And so, I think what we're missing, particularly when it comes to organizations and leaders, is that this system isn't set up the right way in many cases. So, in a lot of organizations, there's a lack of alignment. Things have shifted a lot. The pace of change is accelerating. We're in an environment now where it's laughable to have a 10-year strategic plan. I mean, you're lucky if you can think out 3 years and then you need to adapt and adjust. So priorities are constantly shifting. And in many cases, leadership teams are not doing a great job of coming back and realigning around priorities and what's changed and then communicating that clarity to teams. And so that causes a fundamental issue in people. Maybe their capacity is really capacity issue rather than a personal productivity issue. Another is that when we're planning projects for the year, some companies still aren't looking at resources. And then we're getting halfway through the year and realizing IT and marketing and all these departments are involved in every project, and it's not possible for them to do all these things. And so those are some things. And then going back to not everyone is meant to be a leader. I believe that we have people in management roles who are just, maybe they could have been successful a few decades ago, but as things have evolved, if we've not evolved our practices of how we lead, then it becomes overwhelming as a manager. If we're stuck in fixer mode and we haven't trained people, really leadership today takes some formal training, some practices, some principles that help us be successful. These are not innate qualities for people. And so we're not doing a service to our employees and the well being of our managers and our employees by not giving people the tools to be successful in their leadership roles.
Absolutely. And I also think that leaders can really model behavior for their teams and the people that they lead. And if you have a manager or a boss who's sending you emails at 2 o'clock in the morning or, asking for projects and deliverables on the weekend, then that just sets the tone and the expectation that, okay, this is how we all have to behave now. I can't, turn my phone off. I can't leave my work at work and take the weekend off and be with my family. I have to be constantly checking my email in the middle of the night because
Yes,
something might come up. And then that really just creates this feed forward system of burnout for
that's
everybody. And if as a leader, you model just having an out of office reply or saying, hey guys, like, on the weekends, I will not be checking my email, and I expect that you won't either, and that's okay. Unless we have this extreme deadline or this very, very important project in this rare circumstance, but I think that really does go a long way in terms of setting the tone and
yes, because
preventing burnout among your team.
absolutely, because it perpetuates it. And when we're not setting those boundaries for ourselves, and I really think boundaries are a lot about setting ourselves up for success. How can we work at our best? It's not about putting barriers up for other people, it's really about us. And so you're right. We perpetuate this issue when we don't model that for our teams. And I think part of not getting leadership training is that we think we have to work more hours to catch up, and really, I find it's the opposite, that often it's when we're adding more hours, we're just becoming burnt out because we're exhausted and we're no longer effective. We hit a ceiling. And when we're answering emails all the time and we're not disconnecting and showing our teams that that's healthy leadership, that's healthy work life, then people, I think, even have that low level of anxiety all the time. I know for me, I used to go on vacation, especially when I first started my business. For the first several years, I'd go on vacation and I would always have my email, like I check it constantly. And even if nothing big came through, it was on my mind the whole vacation. So I had this low level of anxiety constantly, and I never could fully relax. I mean, to this day, now I completely disconnect now. And I think this is where we can lean into our teams and we set it up the right way. We let our team know I'm going on vacation, I'm going to disconnect. If there is an emergency, you can text me or, set that up, but then completely log out of your email. It takes me a couple days to ease into it. I feel a little anxiety in the beginning, but then once I do that, you really get to rejuvenate and enjoy that vacation. And you're also teaching your team that that's healthy, that that's what you want them to do too, that they can disconnect and really rejuvenate and come back fresher with better ideas and more energy to be able to do the work they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, you would always know the difference between leaders who, and I remember this from my days in corporate. You knew they were on vacation. So there were two types. One had an out of office reply set, and they might still respond to you,
Yeah.
depending. And the other never had an out of office reply. And you knew that they're on vacation on a beach somewhere, just attached to their phone.
Yes.
And they're
Yes.
just constantly checking email and responding. And they're pretending that they're on vacation. But in reality, They're not,
That's right.
they've just changed the backdrop of their office.
Yeah. And I think we underuse the out of office. I think the out of office is such a great tool that first of all, you need to use that if you're going on vacation because one of my pet peeves is when I send a message to someone and I don't hear back. And then I'm like, huh,
Yes, and you're like,
what?
"Did it go through? Is
Right.
there
Going
something
to a
wrong
black
with my
hole.
email? Is my email did it go to junk? Is it hacked? I don't know."
And
My
then a week
email was
later,
recently hacked, so I definitely
oh,
oh, it's the worst. Anyway, yeah.
so then a week later, you find out that person's on vacation and you're like, well, it would have been nice to know that, right? But I think we can even use it beyond just vacations. I mean, certainly vacations. If you're going on vacation, let people know that so that, and even if you have a practice where I know some leaders where they have a different type of job where maybe they can't completely disconnect. And so what we've talked about is one time a day they check it, but they're only one time and then they log off but at least it lets people know, it sets the expectation that you're not going to respond right away. When someone sends you an email and they don't hear anything, then there's an expectation there. But I also think we can use it if you're out of the office for half a day at a strategic retreat or training or other things
Absolutely.
to let people know. So then again, it sets the expectation because I think in our world today, we're in such an instantaneous society where we expect things to be
Yes.
immediate that we also train people in this way of how to treat our time. And so if you're going to be in a meeting with your team for a day and just put it on there saying, I'll be available, answer tomorrow, it gives you a little bit of that breathing room to not be so reactive and constantly connected.
Yes. Yes. I agree completely. Now speaking of setting boundaries and limits and caps and capacity, you actually practice what you preach and you have capped your work week at 40 hours.
Yeah.
Which is, which is not nothing. I mean, that's a full significant work week, but talk to us a little bit more about how you decided to do that, how you implement that, how do you actually hold yourself accountable,
Yeah.
and what has that been like?
Yeah. Well, I have to be honest, sometimes I hesitate to share that because I think in our society, we think of 40 hours as like, who does that? I mean, that's part time. We don't think of that as a full schedule, even though
And
it
that's
is.
so funny because I think of that as like way too full time.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
like a lot
I,
of hours.
I
Yeah.
know we were talking before the call. I mean, we're both moms and like we have other jobs, right?
Right. Because you're not counting all the other stuff.
Exactly. And so I feel like I work a lot more than that, which I do because I come home to my full-time job and then I have kids and all of that. But I want to I hesitate sometimes to say it because I do think in our society we're such a busy culture and overwork and it's like how is that possible for you to be able to be successful? And I will say there are trade-offs, there are sacrifices. So as a business owner, I have a successful business and I've done that on 40 hours a week. But I could have grown even faster if I add an extra 10 hours. But quality of life is very important for me. I'm not suggesting that every leader can cap at 40 hours. So I want to say that because I know it depends on the position. However, I think the bigger message here is that most leaders are working more hours than they probably need to. And it's because we're not efficient. We don't have intentional practices. We're reacting all day and we're getting into fixing instead of facilitating. And so by implementing some of the principles and others that we've talked about today, you start to become so much more intentional with your time that you leave more room for the other parts of your life. Part of when I wrote my book is certainly about productivity and leadership principles and skills and strategies. But a bigger part of that is that I see so many leaders who are just adding hours and so stressed out and overwhelmed and burnt out. And I think there's a better way that you can have a thriving career and a thriving personal life. It's not easy, it takes some sacrifice, but the intentionality when I believe in compressing our time, that when we have a hard stop to our day, and that might vary from leader to leader. But I know for myself, having that hard stop at a certain time forces me to be very intentional about the time that I do have. And so those 40 hours are not wasted. They are, and sometimes I think I need to build in more breathing room because I'm so on during those 40 hours. So that's a work on for me is not putting so much in my schedule. And I think for a lot of leaders can relate to that. But the intentionality that you get of that so that you can really step away and then come back, as your best and manage that energy has been so impactful for me. So it's a way I've lived my life. It's a full life. I have a lot of stuff going on outside of work too, but that's been a way that I've been able to manage a successful business while also having a great family life.
So how do you do it all? I mean, how are you a work-life balance person or a work-life integration person?
You know, this is a great conversation because I think sometimes the labels matter less because I see so many times when balance is brought up, people are like, well, it's not balance, it's not possible. And then some people are integration. And I can say that a lot of my clients don't have the luxury of integrating their personal life and their work life. They go to work and they're at work. And, I work in a lot of financial institutions, manufacturers, and there's no such thing as integration for a lot of those people. So I think we all know what we mean when we're talking about balance or integration. It's that we want to be able to have both. We want a great family life, we want time for, outside interests and to be able to enjoy life while we also want a successful career. I don't do it all. I do delegate a lot. I have a team and I practice the facilitation. For me, the thing I've had to work on the most in my career, whether it's as an entrepreneur or as a leader, has been delegation. And I think this is probably a lot of your listeners who are leaders can relate to this. It's hard. I can do something, takes me 5 minutes. Why would I take a half hour to teach a team member? So that's something I'm constantly going through my week, writing down when I find I'm doing something someone else on my team can do better, and try to just over time delegate as much of that as possible so that I'm truly in my key result areas, which is facilitating, writing, speaking, these things I have to do, not sending out handouts, mailing books or these other things. And then at home too, I'm blessed to have a great partner. My husband does a lot of the stuff that back 20 years ago, more, gender norms that women typically would be doing. He takes the kids every day, does a lot of the laundry, we are true partners. And that's really helped. I know not everyone has that luxury, but I've tried as much as possible to delegate those things so that when I come into my workspace, I can really focus on the things that move the needle and that matter.
Yeah, the delegation piece is such a hard one. I have so many thoughts and stories about that. I mean, certainly in medicine, it is such a challenge because you sort of rise up the ranks really quickly from being a medical student to an intern to a junior resident to a senior resident to an attending. And then when you're in that sort of senior resident role, you are really more of a leader than you are a doer. I mean, you are still seeing patients and doing the work, but you are supervising the junior residents, you're supervising the medical students, you're teaching them, you're trying to give them some agency and some empowerment while also not allowing them to kill patients. And then in the end, it's like the buck really does stop here and it does stop with you and then of course the attending, but there's that pressure of I am responsible for all of
That's
this and yet I have to delegate it, but yet I also have to make sure it's all done correctly. And how do you really balance that of like allowing people to do the thing and not being neurotic about checking it, but then also being responsible for it? I find that that is a really tough place for a lot of us as leaders, especially if we, have that sense of responsibility and that fixer
And it is a
mentality.
big responsibility. And I
Yeah.
think a big piece of this is instilling accountability as much as possible on the front end, ownership and accountability. And I use the word instilling purposely because I think we, particularly in organizations and maybe in the medical field too, where we hold people accountable. Like when something goes wrong, then we're holding them accountable and it has a negative connotation. And so I think as leaders, being able to instill that in the front end of creating clarity, which, what is it specifically? What are the outcomes we're looking for? Being specific with our language. So many leaders, I was just leading a session this morning where we were talking about vague language, things like
Mm.
when you get a chance, when you get That's the one I've had to learn to banish from my vocabulary because I think we use these words because we don't want to be the bossy boss, the, bureaucratic top-down boss. And so we use vague language and we don't set people up for success. So I think, talking about the outcomes, what are the success criteria for this project or this thing you're doing? Walking people through that so that they're set up in the right way to where then they can go off and you can give them that autonomy with check-ins to make sure that things are okay. But I think a lot of times we don't do that. We don't set people up that way for success. And then when things go wrong, we have to come around the back end and help fix that. So it will be a learning process for some people. We don't want to be completely hands off. But I think, instilling those things as much as possible in the beginning, being really clear about the outcomes you're looking for, encouraging people to ask for clarity when they don't have it. Like I've told my team, if I'm not clear, something's not clear because I tend to be fast paced. And I call this drive by delegation, where I'm like, oh, now I'm ready to delegate here. Here's a project or a task. Go at it.
Yep.
And they're like, okay, well, what are you looking for? Right. And so I think there's two extremes. Sometimes people are ready to delegate and they don't take those few steps to set that person up, or they hold on and they micromanage it. And so if you can set that up in the beginning, there's some frameworks to do that, then people will generally take ownership.
How do you handle, sort of pushback or resistance from junior team members for like doing the work? Because I thought of an example from my early managerial days. Oh my God, this was so crazy. I was working at a startup, it was a medical startup, and we wrote a lot of grants, and that was how we funded our projects. And these were really multi-million dollar NIH grants. It was really intense work. But we trained everyone on how to do it, and it was a formula, and you got to write this section and this section, and but there was always a part where it was down to the wire. And me being a Gen Xer, being the fixer, always doing the work, and then I had to manage a lot of little baby millennials at the time, and I would say, okay, we need to hand this section in. Can you guys work on this, etc. And I will never forget them coming back to me and saying, well, it seems like you have a really good handle on this, so
Oh my gosh.
perhaps you should write it. And I was like, I'm sorry, what?
That's upward delegation. Wow.
Yes. It was shocking to me that they were kind of like pushing back, refusing to do it, and sort of handing it back to me saying, I don't really feel like working on this right now. And you seem to have a handle on it. I was just like, and I spoke to the boss and was like, we need to fire them, except we don't have the capacity to fire them.
It's
And
like you
as
need them right now,
And as
but
soon as the grant was turned in, of course, one of them quit, and the other
yeah.
one,
Yeah.
got a grad school position. Like, they were not in it.
Yeah.
It
They
was
weren't
just,
invested,
oh
right?
my God. But I
Yeah.
will never forget that moment of like, I'm sorry, what did you just
What
say?
did you
And that would a
Well,
Gen
in
Xer,
our
that would
world,
just never fly ever.
as a Gen Xer, like, that's, like, insubordination, right?
Yeah,
Because we're like,
exactly.
"Look,"
I was
and
like,
I think
if we did that, we would be just, yeah,
but I think
punished, fired, etc.
you speak to this shift that's happened, I think, in that like our generation was very much conditioned. Put your head down, do as you're told, follow the rules, you're the employee. I do think though that at that time we were also conditioned that the manager has all the answers and should know
Mhm,
everything.
mhm.
There's some
Yep.
residual of that we've had to kind of, I think for a lot of us as leaders, let go of, that we don't need to know all the answers. We're not always believers. Yeah, that's a whole nother level. But I do think that, we're seeing more of that, of people like, well, why aren't you helping with that? Or that's where I would, as much as possible, get into the facilitation of like, well, what do you need to make sure you get that done by Friday? Like what can you put aside to make sure that you're focusing on that? This is part of your responsibility for that. But we do sometimes need to coach people. I've heard this a lot in the leadership programs that I work with, that people are saying, well, different generations are coming in and, they want to be promoted immediately and they want money immediately. And I think those things are true. There is a reality to people have more choices now and they don't settle as much. It doesn't mean we have to give people what they want all the time, but we also don't have to be that transactional leader that says that's not how it works here. I think we can use the coaching approach of, someone says, I want a promotion. Well, tell me, what is it that entices you about that role? What do you think are the qualities or the skills that you'll need to be successful in that? And you can guide them into like, okay, not yet. Here's what you would need to do. Here's the gap. Let's talk about that. And what can you do to start developing yourself in these different areas? And so approaching it that way often can help lead people to that place.
Yeah, especially if there's like a clear trajectory or they know that there's a path forward, that they're not just spinning their wheels, and that, you know, it's not you're just like working for the man, etc. That you could craft an upward path for yourself, if but it's not going to be handed to you on a silver platter
And it's great. You have
on
to
day one.
you got to put the work in for it. Exactly.
Yes, yes, there's no participation trophy promotion. But
Yes. Yes. It's not how it works in the real world.
oh my gosh, we could literally talk forever. I can't believe how much more there is to cover and how much more I would love to talk to you about, especially the motherhood piece and the fact that, we're all fixers at home. And especially just right before we got on this recording, we discovered that we both have very challenging situations with a child with a serious chronic illness, and
That's right.
almost the same chronic illness. I was just like, "What? That's
I know.
crazy."
Just crazy how that is
How
even
how
possible.
did that happen? And that's
Yeah.
a whole other level that I think, it's really nice to talk about leadership and skills and boundaries and this and that when in a perfect world or in an ideal situation when everything is going well, or like maybe you have the 2.5 kids and the picket fence and the supportive husband, or you have help, etc. But when things don't fit that
That's
narrative and that perfect situation and things kind of go off the rails, and when you have a sick kid and it's not like, oh, they're sick for a day, it really throws everything into a spiral. And it can be so easy to fall back into those patterns, to become the fixer. Believe me, like yeah, I've been there. And
and for you and I are in pretty much the same situation of this chronic illness, and
yeah,
it's so hard as a parent, I think, as high achieving people who like to solve problems and fix things. When you're in a situation like this, it really illuminates what you don't have control over. And it's been a huge challenge for me over the past 4 years as I've navigated this with my son. I've come up with a couple of mantras for myself. One is be with what is. I found myself getting into this negative spiral and getting stuck many times. And of course, I just want to acknowledge if anyone else out there has a child with a chronic illness or anything like that, this is not to say that we don't feel those feelings. Are absolutely valid. I mean, I felt grief for a long time of having to navigate the grief cycle. But then there became a time where I realized staying stuck there for my son wasn't helping. He has Crohn's disease and it's really complicated. And so, how can I be with what is and focus on what I can control? I still have the feelings, I still have the challenges, I still have days where it feels so defeating. And then be invested yet detached is my other mantra for myself of I'm invested in things in a way that I will do whatever I can, but trying to be detached from the outcome of I can't control. That's not always easy. I mean, I have a child who struggles in school, and be invested yet detached is like my mantra. All right, Lori, you can help with tutoring, you could do it, but you can't fix it. And if you're trying to get this end goal is your focus, you're going to be consistently disappointed or challenged, and it's going to take a lot of energy. And so, I think it brings a different level of understanding in life that there are things that aren't perfect and that we all have struggles. We all have a story. We have background of things that people maybe even don't know that we're navigating. And whether it's as leaders understanding that about your employees and bringing compassion and well being to your organization, it's also why I'm so passionate about helping leaders be more effective in their role because we have full lives outside of work. And sometimes those things are not easy that we're navigating.
Thank you for sharing all of that. It's so impactful. And I think yeah, it really resonates with me and especially the control piece because yeah, to not have control over your child's safety and health and well-being is just one of the worst things that
It absolutely
yeah.
is, and I think it puts things in perspective, right, of like, wow, like, this is a roller coaster, and I know both of us are in that spot still where
Yep.
it's a roller coaster of, like, my son has been on 4 different medications, and we haven't found
Yeah.
the right one yet, and so it's not like, here's the challenge, you treat the disease, like, it's complicated, every person is different, and things work for
Yep.
different people, and so, it's real life, right?
Yeah.
We're dealing with real
Yeah.
life,
It's
and
real life.
yeah.
Well, we're coming to the final segment of the show, which I like to call the rapid fire segment, where I ask sort of, quick questions. Some of them are deep, some of them are silly, and you just answer like, off the top of your head. So
Okay.
the first one is coffee or tea? What's your go to and how much?
To answer this kind of a little differently, I love green tea. I drink that every day. I was never a coffee drinker, but I love cappuccinos. My husband's Italian and he makes me a cappuccino every morning.
I love that. Yeah, I'm pretty much the same. I'm a matcha girly, but I also make my own espresso lattes, like with foamed milk and
Yeah,
stuff,
me
and
too. Awesome.
saves a lot of money at the coffee shop if you make it yourself. The espresso machine was expensive, and then I was like, yeah, that's going to pay for itself really quickly.
It does, but we have one of those little mocha pots, like the Bialetti, that makes,
Oh, those are the real Italian ones. My dad uses those. Yep.
yeah.
Amazing. Okay, this is a funny one. Email or Slack?
We use Slack in my company, and this is a great example of someone who taught me. So, my team manages me in some ways, and they were like, we're using Slack for internal communication. And then for a lot of external, we use email.
Oh, I like that. Internal versus external. I find that sometimes my Slack messages get buried and lost and I don't check them. Okay, this is a good one. If you could eliminate one meeting from every professional's calendar forever, what would it be? What dies first?
Ooh, that is a great one. I wish I thought about that. One meeting. I would say maybe the update meeting, like just where everyone gets in a room and just circles around and talks about updates. Where nowadays there's so many different ways we could share that information and save ourselves a lot of time. I mean, not that
Yeah.
there's not value in that in some ways, but I think we spend a lot more time on that than we need to.
I remember researching just workplace burnout and the number of meetings and like Zoom meetings that existed on the calendar before COVID, then during COVID, and then after COVID, they haven't decreased. So the number of meetings like tripled and then we never got rid of them.
I believe that.
So
I think
it's
that's
like
our answer is just schedule a
we
meeting.
got to get rid of them.
Another tip for leaders of do an audit of your meetings and see who you can send to your meetings instead of you.
Yes, I love that. Okay. Best piece of advice you've ever gotten.
God, probably focus on what you can control, not on what you can't. And I think that's been a through line through my life. I grew up with some, challenges that I had to overcome. And for a while, focused on the things I couldn't control. And once I shifted into what I had agency over, like that's been something in my life that I've really, as much as possible, it's not always easy, tried to focus on.
Okay. If your leadership philosophy was a bumper sticker, what would it say?
This is easy. Be a facilitator, not a fixer. I'd say be a facilitator, not a fixer.
I love it. Oh my gosh. Okay, this is not even a rapid fire, but you got to say something about what it was like to work with Brené Brown because
Yeah.
I'm a super fan and
Yeah,
she's just
she's
incredible.
fantastic. Yeah, so I went through her training, Dare to Lead training, got certified. I just have to say it was the hardest thing to get into. Like I think getting into college was easier than getting into that cohort. But she's so real and fantastic and just normal. And so spent 3 days learning that training with her, which was really integral. It was fantastic. She since sold, I think, that piece of it. So now people who got trained in that can't use that methodology exactly, but it's really been impactful for me in my leadership and how I work with teams too.
Mm, love it. Okay. What is one sentence you wish every burned out leader had heard before they kind of hit the wall?
One sentence would be really around the focus of intentionality, that the small things, take a breath, pause, stop, slowing down will help speed you up. Speeding
Mm,
up is going to keep your wheels spinning and turning. We can't catch up. But taking that pause to be intentional and just take a breath and, whether it's that focusing question or what's the most important thing or what's most meaningful right now, I think we undervalue reflection in leadership, and giving yourself some of that space can often be the accelerator.
yeah, we're so afraid to pause
Mm.
and ponder and consider 'cause of what we might figure out or find
That's
out. Maybe
and
we find out that we don't want to be a leader.
I think we need to do more of that, of letting it be
Yeah.
okay to
Yeah.
not wanna be a leader.
Yeah.
There are people who don't want that, like Eve, who are fantastic individual contributors who still wanna grow, like you said.
Yeah.
People still wanna have a path. It just may not be leadership.
Yeah. Yeah. Love it. Okay. I am sure that after listening to this episode, people are going to want to find you and get in touch with you and discover you and work with you. So, what are some of the ways that people can get in touch?
Yes, well, would love to connect with anyone on LinkedIn. My website is lauriemaddalena.com. We have a free assessment on there, the fixer-to-facilitator assessment. So it's a really great comprehensive guide with strategies on how to overcome. I talk about the 6 leadership saboteurs that we can overcome as leaders. And so would love for people to take advantage of that resource.
Beautiful. We'll have all of that in the show notes. And if you're listening to this episode and you loved it, please leave us a review and a rating. It really does mean a lot to us and it helps other people discover the show. And then share this episode with a friend, someone who could use it, someone who's in a leadership role in corporate and who, needs to hear all of the amazing golden nuggets that Lori dropped for us today. And as always, remember, burnout is not your destiny, it's your wake up call.